"Dad, look, you're flying economy and we're in business class," his daughter Tiffany said, her voice devoid of shame as they stood in the middle of O'Hare Airport. "I just don't want you sitting with us. It would be awkward." Arthur Pendelton didn't argue, he merely nodded, clutching his modest carry-on. But as Tiffany and her husband breezed through the priority lane, they remained blissfully unaware of one crucial fact: Arthur had paid for every single one of those tickets. And halfway to Miami, while his family enjoyed their complimentary champagne, Arthur calmly reached for the in-flight phone and dialed his private banker. The plastic receiver of the in-flight phone felt cold and greasy against his ear, a stark contrast to the burning humiliation that was still radiating from his chest. Arthur Pendelton sat wedged into seat 34E, his elbows tucked tightly into his ribs to avoid contact with the large, snoring man beside him who smelled faintly of onions and stale tobacco. The narrow economy seat offered no recline, forcing his spine into a rigid upright position that made his 69-year-old joints ache in protest. Up ahead, beyond the heavy blue curtain that separated the classes, his daughter Tiffany and her husband Gavin were likely sipping vintage champagne and stretching their legs in lie-flat pods. They were celebrating the start of a luxury vacation that Arthur had funded entirely, a trip intended to be a family bonding experience but which had begun with his own exile. The line crackled, cutting through the low hum of the jet engines, and a familiar voice answered. "Mr. Pendelton, this is David Sterling. To what do I owe the pleasure of a call from 30,000 feet?" Arthur stared at the gray plastic tray table locked in front of him. There was no pleasure in his voice when he spoke, only a flat, metallic resolve that he had not felt since his days managing high-risk construction sites. "David, I need you to execute a security protocol on my accounts. Specifically, I need a comprehensive audit of all outgoing transactions to Tiffany Pendleton Ross and Gavin Ross over the last 24 months. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the silence heavy with unasked questions. Arthur could imagine David sitting in his mahogany office in downtown Chicago, frowning at his computer screen. "A full audit," Arthur continued, his voice low so the passengers around him would not overhear. "I want every bank transfer, every loan disbursement, and every credit card charge categorized. And David, there is one more thing. You know the Black Centurion supplementary card I issued to Tiffany for emergencies?" "Yes, sir. I have the file right here." "Suspend it. Immediately. Mark it as lost or stolen if you have to, but I want the authorization declined the next time it is swiped." "Are you certain, Arthur?" David asked, his professional demeanor slipping just enough to reveal his concern. "That card has a $50,000 monthly limit. If they are traveling, this could leave them in a difficult position." "That is the point," Arthur whispered, his grip on the phone tightening until his knuckles turned white. "Just do it." He hung up the phone and carefully recoiled the cord. The action felt final, like the closing of a heavy steel door. For the first time in years, the fog of parental guilt that had clouded his judgment began to lift, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of an engineer assessing a structural failure. Arthur leaned his head back against the thin, scratchy antimacassar of the seat. He closed his eyes, but sleep was impossible. Instead, numbers began to scroll through his mind, forming a damning ledger. He thought about the $15,000 he had transferred last month for Leo's private school tuition because Gavin claimed his bonus was delayed. He thought about the $8,000 for the repairs on Tiffany's Range Rover, a car he had bought for her 2 years ago. He thought of the constant stream of small loans, $500 here, $1,000 there, that were always promised to be repaid but never were. He had promised Martha on her deathbed that he would take care of their little girl. He had interpreted that promise as a mandate to never say no, to shield Tiffany from every hardship, to provide the lifestyle of a princess even as she grew into a 38-year-old woman. But as the plane hit a patch of turbulence, shaking the economy cabin with a violent shudder, Arthur realized the terrifying truth. He had not protected her. He had crippled her. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had built bridges and skyscrapers, hands that were now trembling slightly with rage. He had paid $28,000 for 4 business-class tickets so his family could relax. And in return, they had banished him to the back of the plane like an embarrassing secret, terrified that his worn-out coat and modest demeanor would tarnish their carefully curated image. The flight attendant pushed a metal cart down the narrow aisle, bumping Arthur's shoulder hard enough to make him wince. "Pretzels?" she asked, not making eye contact. "No thank you," Arthur said softly. He did not need food. He was full. He was full of years of disrespect, full of excuses, and full of a burning realization that the daughter he loved had looked at him in that airport terminal and seen not a father, but a wallet with a pulse. The audit was just the beginning. By the time this plane touched down in Miami, Arthur Pendelton would no longer be the victim. He was about to become the lesson. The tropical heat of Miami hit Arthur the moment he stepped onto the jet bridge, a humid embrace that felt suffocating after the sterile chill of the cabin. By the time he navigated the long corridor and reached the baggage claim, his back was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. He spotted them immediately. Tiffany and Gavin were standing near the priority carousel, looking bored and irritated. Tiffany was inspecting a microscopic scratch on her vintage Hermes Birkin bag, while Gavin tapped furiously on his phone. As Arthur approached, dragging his battered Samsonite suitcase that had traveled with him to construction sites for 20 years, neither of them moved to help. "Took you long enough, Dad," Tiffany said, snapping her gum. "The humidity is already ruining my blowout." "Where were you?" "Economy deplanes last," Arthur said simply, his voice raspy from dehydration. Gavin looked up, slipping his phone into the pocket of his linen blazer. "Well, let us get the car. I booked the Escalade. We need the space for the luggage." At the rental counter, Arthur reached for his wallet to pay the deposit, a reflex honed by decades of being the provider. But he stopped himself. His hand hovered over his pocket, then dropped back to his side. He watched Gavin reluctantly slap down his own platinum card, the one Arthur knew was likely maxed out. When they reached the gleaming black SUV in the parking garage, Gavin tossed the keys through the air. They landed with a heavy clatter at Arthur's feet. "You mind driving, Arthur?" Gavin asked, already opening the rear door for Tiffany. "I had a few too many mimosas during the flight." "Safety first, right?" Arthur stared at the keys on the concrete floor. He bent down slowly, his knees popping audibly, and picked them up. He did not argue. He climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors while his daughter and son-in-law settled into the spacious leather seats behind him. The partition glass was down, but the emotional barrier was bulletproof. From the rearview mirror, Arthur watched them. Tiffany was laughing at something on her phone, showing it to Leo and Sophie, while Gavin stretched his legs out, looking like a king being ferried by an elderly servant. They did not ask how his flight was. They did not ask if he was hungry. They treated him exactly as they saw him, a utility, a function, a driver. The drive to the villa took 45 minutes. Arthur navigated the heavy Miami traffic in silence, listening to the chatter from the back seat about dinner reservations at Nobu and VIP tables at clubs. They were planning to spend thousands of dollars in the next few days. Money they did not have. Money they assumed Arthur would wire to them the moment the bill arrived. They pulled up to the rental property, a sprawling modern mansion of white concrete and glass overlooking the bay. It was magnificent and excessively expensive. As they hauled the luggage inside, Tiffany took charge of the room assignments with the efficiency of a general. "Okay, Gavin and I will take the master suite upstairs because it has the balcony," she announced, her voice echoing in the marble foyer. "Leo and Sophie, you guys get the 2 rooms with the pool view." She turned to Arthur, pointing to a small, windowless door tucked behind the kitchen pantry. "And Dad, this one is yours. It is cozy and quiet, so the kids will not wake you up early. It is actually perfect for you since you like to sleep in." Arthur opened the door. It was a converted storage room, barely large enough for a twin bed and a nightstand. There was no view, no ventilation, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. It was a room designed for staff, for the invisible people who kept the machinery of luxury running. "Perfect," Arthur said, placing his bag on the narrow mattress. He turned back to face them, but they had already dispersed, racing upstairs to claim their ocean views and connect to the Wi-Fi. Arthur stood alone in the hallway, listening to their footsteps thumping on the ceiling above his head. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lilies from the foyer arrangement. They thought they had put him in a box. They thought they had silenced him. But as he closed the door to his tiny, windowless cell, Arthur Pendelton smiled for the first time that day. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert who had just identified the exact structural weakness of a condemned building. The implosion was coming, and he had the best seat in the house to watch it fall. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the villa, the illuminating dust motes dancing over the Italian marble floors. It was a picture of paradise, but the atmosphere inside was anything but serene. Arthur stood at the kitchen island, buttering toast for his grandchildren, while Tiffany and Gavin swept through the room like a hurricane of expensive cologne and urgency. "We are heading to Ball Harbor for a few hours," Tiffany announced, adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses as she grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge. She did not look at Arthur, her gaze fixed on her reflection in the stainless steel appliances. "We have appointments at the spa, and then Gavin needs to look at some watches. We will be back for dinner." Gavin was already at the door, tapping his foot impatiently in his Gucci loafers. "Keep an eye on them, Arthur. And do not let them eat too much sugar. We are trying to keep them on a macrobiotic diet." The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Arthur turned to look at Leo, who was 10, and Sophie, who was 7. They were sitting at the breakfast bar, glued to their tablets, the blue light reflecting in their glazed eyes. "Hey, kiddos," Arthur said, forcing a cheerful tone as he slid the plates of toast toward them. "How about we put the screens away for a bit? We could go down to the beach and look for shells. Your grandma and I used to find the most beautiful conch shells right on this coast." Leo did not look up. "Shells are boring, Grandpa." Sophie took a bite of her toast and made a face. This is not the gluten-free bread Mom buys. I cannot eat this." Arthur sighed, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite them. He watched them for a moment, seeing the ghosts of his own daughter in their faces. He remembered when Tiffany used to love hunting for shells, before the world told her that things only had value if they had a price tag. "Leo," Arthur tried again. "I noticed you are pretty good at that game you are playing. Is it difficult?" Leo finally lowered the tablet, but his expression was not one of connection. It was calculating. "Actually, Dad said you would buy me the new iPad Pro today. The one with the terabyte of storage. This one is lagging." Arthur blinked. "Your dad said that?" "Yeah," Leo said, shrugging as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He said you are super rich, even if you do not act like it. He said you have so much money you do not know what to do with it, so I should just ask you. Can we go to the Apple store? The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. He looked at his grandson, a child who should have been asking for a story or a game of catch, but was instead negotiating a transaction. We are not going to the store today, Leo, Arthur said firmly. Leo scowled and went back to his screen. You are so cheap. Dad was right. Before Arthur could process the sting of that remark, Sophie chimed in, her voice high and innocent, which made her words even more cutting. Grandpa, why do you wear that shirt? She asked, pointing a manicured little finger at Arthur's faded polo. It has a hole in the collar. It is comfortable, Sophie. Clothes are meant to be worn, not just looked at. Mom says you look like the gardener, Sophie giggled, covering her mouth. She told Daddy that she is embarrassed to be seen with you in public because you dress like a hobo. She said we have to pretend you are the help when her friends come over. The room seemed to tilt. Arthur looked from Sophie to Leo, seeing the smug satisfaction on the boy's face and the cruel amusement on the girl's. These were not their words. These were scripts, rehearsed and repeated at the dinner table, in the car, in the private moments of a family that viewed him not as a patriarch, but as a parasite they were waiting to inherit from. The rot had spread. It was not just Tiffany and Gavin anymore. The poison of entitlement and materialism was seeping into the next generation, twisting their innocence into greed. If he did nothing, if he continued to be the silent wallet, Leo and Sophie would grow up to be just like their parents. Soulless. Empty. Cruel. Arthur stood up slowly, leaving his own toast untouched. He walked to the window and looked out at the turquoise swimming pool where no one was swimming. The sadness that had weighed him down since the airport began to harden into something else. Determination. He was not just fighting for his dignity anymore. He was fighting for their souls. He had to break the cycle, and to do that, he would have to break the bank. I am going to make a call, Arthur said quietly. You two stay here. He walked back to his tiny, windowless room and closed the door. The darkness was absolute, but for the first time in a long time, Arthur saw exactly what he had to do. The lesson had to be severe. It had to be unforgettable. And it had to start now. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Miami sky in bruising shades of purple and orange, but the air inside the villa grew colder by the minute. Arthur stood in the foyer, patting the pockets of his linen trousers. He had placed his wallet on the entry console exactly 10 minutes ago, right next to the crystal vase. He remembered the sound of the leather hitting the marble. Now, the surface was empty. Looking for something, Arthur? Gavin asked, strolling into the room with a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. My wallet, Arthur said, his brow furrowing. I put it right here. Gavin took a slow sip of his drink, watching Arthur with the predatory patience of a cat toying with a mouse. Are you sure? You have been misplacing things a lot lately, Arthur. Remember the keys at the airport? I did not misplace the keys, Arthur said, his voice steady despite the sudden spike in his heart rate. You took them. Gavin chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made Arthur's skin crawl. He walked over to the kitchen island, 5 feet away, and pointed. It is right there, Arthur. Next to the fruit bowl. Where you left it. Arthur stared. The wallet was indeed there. But he had not been near the kitchen island. He knew, with the geometric precision of a man who had built bridges that withstood hurricanes, that he had not put it there. "I did not put it there," Arthur said. Tiffany walked in then, looking refreshed from her spa treatment but wearing an expression of practiced concern. "Dad, stop arguing," she said, linking her arm through Gavin's. "You did put it there. We saw you. You walked right in, put it by the bananas, and then went to your room." Arthur started, then stopped. 2 against 1. The oldest trick in the book. "We are worried about you, Dad," Tiffany continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to sound caring but felt suffocating. "You are forgetting conversations, too. Just yesterday, you promised Gavin you would transfer the down payment for the new boat this morning. We checked the account, and nothing came through." Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of his neck. "I never promised to buy you a boat. We never even discussed a boat." Gavin sighed, shaking his head at Tiffany. "See? I told you." He does not remember. "It is getting worse faster than we thought." They exchanged a look, a silent communication of conspirators agreeing on a script. Gavin set his glass down and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Look, Arthur, nobody wants to say the word dementia. It is a scary word. But we have to be realistic. You are living all alone in that big house in Chicago. It is dangerous. What if you leave the stove on? What if you forget to pay the bills?" "I have never missed a bill in 40 years, Arthur said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Not yet," Tiffany said softly. "But maybe it is time to simplify. Gavin and I were looking at this brochures for Sunset Gardens. It is a luxury assisted living facility right near our house. 5-star dining, medical staff on call 24 hours a day. You would be safe there. And," Gavin added, sliding a sleek, heavy envelope across the marble counter, "to take the burden off your shoulders, we had our lawyer draft up a durable power of attorney. It just gives us the ability to handle the boring stuff. Managing the portfolio, paying the taxes, dealing with the estate planning. You just sign it, and you can relax. No more worrying about wallets or bank transfers." Arthur looked at the envelope. It was thick, creamy paper, the kind used for important legal documents. They had brought it with them. This was not a spontaneous suggestion born of concern, it was a premeditated ambush. They were not trying to help him. They were trying to erase him. "I am not signing anything," Arthur said, his voice quiet but hard. Tiffany's face hardened, the mask of concern slipping for a fraction of a second. "Dad, do not be difficult. We are trying to help you. If you cannot manage your own affairs, the state will step in. Do you want a stranger controlling your money, or your family?" "My family," Arthur thought bitterly, looking at the son-in-law who mocked him and the daughter who gaslighted him. "I think I need some fresh air," Arthur said, turning away from the envelope and the accusing eyes of his children. He walked out onto the terrace, his heart hammering against his ribs. They were trying to make him doubt his own mind. It was cruel, it was calculated, and it was terrifying. But as he looked out at the darkening ocean, Arthur felt the steel in his spine reinforce itself. They thought he was a confused old man losing his grip on reality. They had no idea that he was the only one in this house who saw things exactly as they were. And he was about to show them just how sharp his memory really was. The restaurant, the Gilded Palm, was a cathedral of glass and gold perched on the edge of the water, a place where the menu had no prices and the waiters spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Gavin had ordered 2 bottles of 1996 Chateau Margaux without glancing at Arthur, claiming that the vintage had a bold structure that paired perfectly with the Wagyu beef. Arthur sat silently at the head of the table, nursing a glass of tap water. He had ordered the tomato soup, the cheapest item on the menu, while his family feasted on lobster tails and truffle risotto. The conversation flowed around him like a river around a stone. They talked about yacht clubs, private schools, and the upcoming gala season in Chicago, ignoring the man whose labor had funded every syllable of their pretension. Then came the moment Arthur had been waiting for. The waiter placed the black leather folder on the center of the pristine white tablecloth. It sat there for a moment, a heavy, silent accusation. Gavin wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and gave the folder a casual flick with his finger, sliding it across the table until it rested in front of Arthur. "You get this one, Arthur," Gavin said, leaning back in his chair and loosening his belt. "I left my wallet in the car." Again. Arthur looked at the folder. He opened it slowly. The total was $3,412. It was an obscene amount for a Tuesday night dinner, more than his father had earned in 6 months at the steel mill. Arthur closed the folder. He placed his hand on top of it and slid it back across the table, past the crystal wine glasses and the half-eaten lobster shells, until it rested directly in front of Gavin. "No," Arthur said. The single word hung in the air, louder than the clatter of silverware or the ambient jazz music. The table went deadly silent. Gavin blinked, his face flushing a mottled red. "Excuse me." Gavin laughed nervously, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "Good one, Arthur. Just put the card down. The waiter is waiting." "I said no," Arthur repeated, his voice steady and calm. "I did not order the wine. I did not order the lobster. And I am certainly not paying $3,000 for a meal where I was treated like a ghost." Tiffany slammed her hand onto the table, causing the silverware to jump. "Dad, stop it. You are making a scene. Just pay the bill. You are being ridiculous." "Am I?" Arthur asked, looking his daughter in the eye. "Or am I just remembering? You said yesterday that my memory was failing, Tiffany. But I remember perfectly well that I flew here in economy while you drank champagne. I remember being told I was an embarrassment. And I remember that I have paid for every meal, every flight, and every mistake you two have made for the last 10 years. You are selfish." Tiffany hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. "We are your family. How can you be so cheap? We are trying to have a nice night and you are ruining it because you are obsessed with money." Gavin leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Look, old man. If you do not pay this bill right now, we are leaving you here. You can walk back to the villa." Arthur stood up. He smoothed the front of his inexpensive polo shirt and picked up his phone. "I already called an Uber," Arthur said. "It is waiting outside." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it gently on the table next to the black folder. "That is for my soup," he said. As he turned to walk away, he heard Tiffany's voice rising to a shriek behind him. "Dad! You come back here. Dad! How are we supposed to pay for this?" Arthur did not look back. He walked through the crowded dining room, past the staring patrons, and out into the humid Miami night. He knew exactly what would happen next. Gavin would try to use the corporate card, declined. Tiffany would try the supplementary Centurion card, declined. They were sitting on a $3,000 bill with no means to pay it. The humiliation he had felt at the airport was about to be returned to sender, with interest. The villa was silent when Arthur returned, a hollow, echoing silence that felt more welcoming than the chaotic noise of his family. He did not turn on the lights. He navigated by the pale moonlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime inspecting foundations in the dark. He went straight to his small, windowless room behind the kitchen pantry. He did not unpack. He simply zipped up his battered Samsonite suitcase, the sound sharp and final in the stillness. He checked the room to make sure he had left nothing behind: his phone charger, his blood pressure medication, and the photo of Martha he kept in his travel wallet. That was all he needed. That was all he had. It was 4 o'clock in the morning when the headlights of the taxi swept across the driveway. Arthur left the key to the rental car on a kitchen island, exactly where Gavin had claimed the wallet had been. It was a petty gesture, perhaps, but it felt like a necessary correction to the record. He did not go upstairs to say goodbye to Leo and Sophie. The thought of seeing them sleeping, innocent but already tainted by their parents' greed, was too painful. He would save them later, but first, he had to save himself. At Miami International Airport, the terminal was quiet. Arthur walked past the long, snaking economy line where he had stood just 2 days ago. He walked up to the pristine counter marked first class. "One way to Chicago, please," Arthur told the agent, handing over his platinum card. The one he had never let Gavin touch. The agent smiled. "We have a seat on the 6 a.m. flight, Mr. Pendelton." "Seat 1A. "Thank you," Arthur said. "I will take it." Boarding the plane felt like stepping into a different world. He was greeted by name, offered a hot towel, and settled into a wide, leather seat that smelled of expensive conditioning cream. As the plane taxied down the runway, lifting off over the sleeping city where his daughter was likely frantically trying to figure out how to pay a $3,000 dinner bill, Arthur felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was not guilt. The guilt had burned away in the restaurant. It was the cold, hollow ache of amputation. He had cut off a limb to save the body. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendant appeared with a crystal flute of champagne. "For you, sir." Arthur took the glass. "Yes. Thank you." He took a sip, the bubbles sharp and cold against his tongue. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. He clicked the pen open and wrote 3 words at the top of the page: Operation Firewall. Underneath, he began to list his next steps with the precision of a structural engineer planning a demolition. 1. Meet with Saul Berkowitz immediately upon landing. 2. Draft a revocable living trust. 3. Schedule a comprehensive competency evaluation with Dr. Evans at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. 4. Change the locks on the Lakeshore Drive house. He stared at the list. It was a battle plan. He was 69 years old, sitting alone at 30,000 feet, preparing to go to war with his own flesh and blood. The loneliness was vast, stretching out like the clouds beneath the wing, but as he looked at the list, Arthur realized that for the first time in years, he was not afraid. He was free. And he was dangerous. The leather chair in Saul Berkowitz's office creaked as the old lawyer leaned forward, his thick eyebrows knitting together in a frown that had terrified opposing counsel for 40 years. Outside the window, the gray Chicago skyline stood stoic against the winter wind, mirroring the mood inside the room. On the mahogany desk between them lay the forensic audit Arthur had requested from the plane. $450,000, Saul said, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "In 2 years, Arthur. They have bled you dry of nearly $500,000. Arthur stared at the stack of papers. Seeing the number spoken aloud made it real in a way the spreadsheet had not. It was the price of a small house. It was the cost of a college education. It was the quantifiable weight of his daughter's entitlement. And they still wanted to put me in a home, Arthur said quietly. They said I was forgetting things. That I was losing my grip. Saul slammed his hand on the desk. They are gaslighting you, Arthur. It is a classic move. Declare the cow incompetent so you can take over the milk supply. But we are going to stop them. Today. Saul pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. We are establishing a revocable living trust immediately. We will transfer the deed to your Lake Shore Drive house, your investment portfolio, and your savings into the trust. You will be the primary trustee, maintaining full control. But the moment anyone tries to declare you incapacitated, a successor trustee of your choosing steps in. Not Tiffany. Not Gavin. A neutral third party. Me. Do it, Arthur said, the engineer in him appreciating the structural integrity of the plan. And the power of attorney they tried to make you sign. Saul asked, pen hovering. Arthur shook his head. I did not sign it. But they have it. Good. Because we are executing a new one today, revoking any previous drafts. And we are adding a poison pill clause. If any beneficiary contests the validity of the trust, they are automatically disinherited. Arthur felt a pang of grief, sharp and sudden. He was essentially writing his only child out of his life. But then he remembered the look on Leo's face when he asked for the iPad, the sneer on Gavin's face at the restaurant. This was surgery. It had to be done to save the patient. I also need one more thing, Arthur said, standing up. I have an appointment at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in an hour. Saul looked up, surprised. Are you ill? No, Arthur said, buttoning his coat. I am going to see Dr. Evans, the head of neurology. I am paying for a full forensic psychiatric evaluation. Cognitive function, memory retention, decision-making capacity. I want a stamped, notarized certificate from the best doctor in the state saying that I am sound of mind. Saul smiled, a slow, shark-like grin. You are building a fortress, Arthur. I am building a firewall, Arthur corrected him. And when they try to hack their way back in, they are going to hit a wall of steel. 2 hours later, Arthur sat in a sterile white room while Dr. Evans guided him through a battery of tests. He recalled lists of random words, solved complex logic puzzles, and navigated spatial reasoning tasks. He did not just pass, he excelled. The focus that had allowed him to calculate load-bearing limits for suspension bridges was still razor-sharp. When the evaluation was over, Dr. Evans handed him a preliminary report. Mr. Pendelton, your cognitive function is in a 99th percentile for your age group, the doctor said. You are not just competent. You are sharper than most of my residents. Arthur took the paper. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt heavier than concrete. It was his shield. He walked out of the hospital and into the biting Chicago cold, tucking the report into his breast pocket next to his heart. Let them come, he thought. Let them bring their lies and their lawyers. He was ready. 3 days later, the peace of Arthur's Lake Shore Drive sanctuary was shattered not by a phone call, but by the violent pounding of fists against his front door. He had been expecting them. The frantic notifications from David Sterling about declined transactions in Miami, the hotel attempting to charge $15,000, a rental car agency trying for $2,000, had painted a clear picture of their humiliation. They were back, and they were desperate. Arthur marked his page in the biography of Winston Churchill he had been reading, placed his porcelain teacup on the saucer with a gentle clink, and stood up. He tightened the belt of his cashmere cardigan, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked rested. He looked strong. He walked to the door and unlocked it. Before the latch even clicked fully open, the heavy oak door was shoved inward, nearly knocking him off balance. Tiffany stormed into the foyer, her face a mask of mascara-streaked fury, dragging a suitcase that looked like it had been packed in a whirlwind. Gavin followed close behind, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, looking less like a master of finance and more like a cornered animal. "You!" Tiffany screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her father. "You stranded us. You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what it was like?" The hotel manager came to the pool, Dad, and told us our credit was no good in front of everyone. We had to call Gavin's mother to buy economy tickets home. Economy. She threw her designer handbag onto the antique bench Arthur's wife had restored years ago. It landed with a heavy thud. We had to take a taxi from O'Hare because the car's service wouldn't pick up, she continued, her voice cracking with self-pity. The kids are crying in the car. They are traumatized, Dad. Traumatized because their grandfather decided to have a tantrum and cut us off. Arthur did not raise his voice. He did not flinch. He simply closed the door to shut out the biting winter wind and turned to face them. "Hello, Tiffany." "Hello, Gavin." I trust the flight back was educational. Gavin stepped forward, invading Arthur's personal space. He smelled of stale airplane air and nervous sweat. "Drop the act, Arthur. This isn't funny. You froze the accounts. You reported the card stolen. Do you know that is fraud? I could have you arrested for filing a false police report." "It was not a false report," Arthur said calmly, walking back into the living room and sitting in his wingback chair. "I reported unauthorized use of my funds. Since I did not authorize a $15,000 extension on a hotel stay I was not invited to enjoy, the bank agreed with me. You gave us those cards." Gavin shouted, veins bulging in his neck. "You said we were family. You said you would take care of us." "I said I would help you," Arthur corrected, picking up his tea again. "I never said I would finance a lifestyle I cannot afford for people who treat me like a servant." Tiffany let out a sob, collapsing onto the sofa. "But you can afford it. You have millions sitting in those accounts doing nothing. Mom wanted us to have that money. She wouldn't want you to hoard it like some miser while her daughter suffers." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "Do not bring your mother into this. Martha wanted you to be happy, Tiffany. She did not want you to be useless." The word hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Gavin paced the room, running his hands through his thinning hair. He looked at the expensive art on the walls, the Persian rugs, the trappings of wealth that he so desperately wanted to claim as his own. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the man sitting in the chair was not the confused, pliable old fool they had mocked in Miami. This was the man who had managed construction crews of 200 men. This was a man of steel. Gavin stopped pacing. He looked at Arthur, and the anger in his eyes suddenly dissolved, replaced by a wet, pathetic sheen of tears. It was a transformation so sudden it was almost impressive. He sank to his knees on the rug, clasping his hands together. "Arthur, please," Gavin said, his voice trembling. We are in trouble. Real trouble." Arthur watched him over the rim of his teacup. "What kind of trouble, Gavin?" "It is the market," Gavin choked out. "I leveraged too much. The crypto investments, the tech startups, they all tanked. I borrowed money, Arthur. From people you do not want to borrow from. Sharks. They are calling me. They are threatening to come to the house. He looked up at Arthur, eyes pleading. We are $300,000 in the hole, Arthur. Not including the mortgage. If we do not pay them $50,000 by Friday, I don't know what they will do. They might hurt me. They might hurt Tiffany. Tiffany looked up, shocked. Gavin, you told me it was just a liquidity issue. I lied. Gavin cried, burying his face in his hands. I wanted to give you everything, Tiff. I wanted to be the man your dad is. I just needed a lucky break. Arthur, please. I am begging you. Just this once. Clear the debts. I swear on my life, I will get a real job. I will drive Uber. I will do anything. Just save us. Arthur looked at the weeping man on his floor. He looked at his daughter, whose face was a mixture of horror and calculation, already processing how to use this new victimhood to her advantage. For a moment, the old Arthur, the father who fixed broken toys and kissed scraped knees, wanted to reach for his checkbook. It would be so easy. Write the check. End the tears. Buy the peace. But then he remembered the conversation in the Miami villa. Asterisk, he's a wallet with a pulse. Put him in a home. Declare him incompetent, asterisk. Arthur set his tea down. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, looking Gavin dead in the eye. You are right, Gavin, Arthur said softly. You are in very deep trouble. Gavin looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. So, you will help? Arthur stood up. He walked to the fireplace and adjusted a log with the iron poker, the sparks flying up the chimney. I am helping you, Arthur said, his back to them. I am helping you by letting you experience the consequences of your own actions for the first time in your 40 years of life. What? Gavin whispered, the color draining from his face. I am not paying your debts, Gavin. Not a penny. If you owe money to criminals, I suggest you go to the police. If you are broke, I suggest you sell your house and your cars. But you will not get a single dime from me. Tiffany jumped up, her shock turning back into rage. You can't be serious. He just said they might hurt us. You are going to let your grandchildren's father get beaten up. You are a monster. I am a father, Arthur said, turning to face them, his silhouette dark against the fire. And a father's job is to teach his children how to survive. You two have been living in a fantasy world funded by my labor. That world ended when you left me at that airport. Gavin stood up slowly, the tears vanishing as if a switch had been flipped. The pleading face was gone, replaced by the sneering, arrogant mask Arthur had seen at the restaurant. You are making a mistake, old man, Gavin hissed, dusting off the knees of his trousers. A very big mistake. Is that a threat? Arthur asked. It is a promise, Gavin said, his voice dripping with venom. You think you can cut us off? You think you can humiliate us? We will see about that. You are forgetful, Arthur. You are confused. You are a danger to yourself. And we are going to make sure the courts know it. Arthur smiled, a cold, thin smile. Get out of my house. Gavin grabbed Tiffany's arm. Come on. We have a phone call to make. They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled in their frames. Arthur stood alone in the silence of his living room. He picked up his book, but his hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. They had played their hand. They were going for the nuclear auction. They were going to try to declare him insane. Arthur walked to the window and watched them get into their car. He reached into his pocket and touched the folded piece of paper from Dr. Evans. "Go ahead," he whispered to the retreating taillights. "Make your call. I am ready." The silence that filled the house on Lake Shore Drive the morning after the confrontation was heavy and suffocating. Arthur sat in his kitchen, staring at the black landline phone on the wall, willing it not to rain, yet dreading the silence even more. He had not slept. The image of Gavin on his knees, begging for money to pay off loan sharks, played on a loop in his mind. But it was the sudden shift in Gavin's eyes, from pathetic desperation to cold malice, that haunted him. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It was not the hesitant press of a guest, but a long, insistent demand. Arthur checked the security monitor. Gavin and Tiffany stood on his porch. They were not alone. A man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit stood behind them, holding a briefcase. Arthur walked to the door and opened it, but he kept the heavy brass security chain engaged, leaving only a 4-inch gap. "I thought I made myself clear last night," Arthur said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. Gavin stepped forward, his face pressed close to the crack in the door. He looked composed now, the panic of the previous evening replaced by a terrifying arrogance. "We are here to give you one last chance, Arthur," Gavin said smoothly. "This is Mr. Henderson. He is a notary public. We have the revised durable power of attorney papers right here." "I am not signing anything," Arthur repeated. Tiffany stepped into view. She was wearing sunglasses, though the day was overcast. "Dad, please. We spoke to Dr. Feldman this morning. He agrees that your behavior yesterday, the aggression, the paranoia, the refusal to help your family, indicates a rapid cognitive decline. We are trying to save you from yourself." Arthur gripped the edge of the door. "My behavior was a reaction to your greed, Tiffany. Not a symptom of disease." Gavin held up a thick manila envelope. "Here is the deal, Arthur. You open this door, you sign these papers voluntarily, and we take control of the estate. We will put you in the Sunset Gardens suite. It is very nice. You will be comfortable. We will handle the debts, we will handle the house, and we will handle you." "And if I refuse?" Arthur asked. "Then we go to the courthouse on Monday morning," Gavin said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We file for emergency guardianship. We will tell the judge you are financially unstable and mentally incompetent. It will be public. It will be messy. Your name will be dragged through the mud." Arthur looked at his daughter. "And you, Tiffany? You are okay with this?" Tiffany took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry and hard. "If you force us to go to court, Dad, we have to protect the children. Until a judge declares you competent, we cannot risk having you around Leo and Sophie. You will not see them. No visits. No holidays. No phone calls." The threat hit Arthur like a physical blow to the chest. They were holding his grandchildren hostage. They were weaponizing his love for the only innocent members of this family to extort his life savings. "You would keep them from me?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "It is for their safety," Tiffany recited, as if reading from a script. "We cannot have them around someone who is unwell." Arthur looked at the notary, who was shifting uncomfortably on the porch. He looked at Gavin, who was smirking. And he looked at Tiffany, the girl he had taught to ride a bike, the woman who was now threatening to erase him from her children's lives for money. The last thread of hope snapped. The father in him finally died, leaving only the engineer, assessing the damage and reinforcing the walls. "You are right," Arthur said softly. Gavin's smile widened. "Good. Open the door, Arthur." "I mean, you are right about the safety," Arthur continued, his voice hardening into steel. "Those children should not be around people who are morally bankrupt." He saw the confusion flicker across Gavin's face. "I will see you in court," Arthur said. He slammed the heavy oak door shut. He threw the deadbolt. Then he threw the secondary lock. From outside, he heard Gavin shouting, "You are making a huge mistake, old man. You will never see those kids again. You hear me? Never." Arthur leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening to the muffled threats. Tears pricked at his eyes, hot and stinging, but he did not let them fall. He walked back to the kitchen and picked up the phone. He dialed Saul Berkowitz's number. "It is starting," Arthur said when the lawyer answered. "They are filing on Monday." "And Saul?" "Yes, Arthur." "Add a clause to the trust for the grandchildren," Arthur said, his voice breaking before steadying again. "An educational fund. But make it airtight. Their parents cannot touch a single cent of it. Not for tuition, not for housing, not for anything. Direct payment to the universities only." "Consider it done," Saul said. Arthur hung up. The house was silent again, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of a fortress before a siege. He was alone, but he was ready. The summons arrived at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, delivered by a process server with a face as blank as the envelope he extended. Arthur took the heavy packet, his hand trembling slightly, not from age, but from the sheer weight of the betrayal it contained. He closed the door and walked to his kitchen table, laying the documents out under the harsh light of the chandelier. In the matter of the guardianship of Arthur Pendelton. He read the words, and then he read them again. The legal jargon was cold and clinical, stripping away 40 years of fatherhood and reducing him to a case number. The petition, signed by Tiffany Pendleton Ross and Gavin Ross, painted a picture of a man Arthur did not recognize. It claimed he had exhibited rapid cognitive decline. It cited the incident in Miami as a psychotic break, alleging that he had abandoned his family without notice due to paranoid delusions. It claimed he was spending his life savings on frivolous luxury travel while neglecting his financial obligations to his dependents. They had twisted everything. His refusal to be a doormat was framed as aggression. His escape from their abuse was framed as abandonment. His perfectly lucid decision to cut them off was framed as financial incompetence. But the humiliation did not stop at his front door. By noon, Arthur realized that Gavin had been busy with more than just lawyers. When Arthur walked down to the mailbox at the end of his driveway, Mrs. Higgins, his neighbor of 20 years, was walking her dog. Usually, she would stop to chat about the weather or her grandchildren. Today, she saw him, offered a tight, pitying smile, and hurriedly crossed the street to avoid him. Arthur stood frozen on the pavement. He pulled his phone from his pocket and saw a text message from Bill, his old golf partner. "Heard the news about your diagnosis, Bart. So sorry to hear you are struggling. Let us know if you need anything. We are praying for you." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. Gavin worked in sales. He knew how to spin a narrative, and he had spun this one masterfully. He had gotten ahead of the story, poisoning the well before Arthur even knew there was a fight. To the world, Arthur was no longer the respected retired engineer. He was the tragic, senile old man whose heroic daughter was trying to save him from himself. He went back inside and drew the curtains. The house felt smaller now, the walls closing in. He was isolated. His friends looked at him with pity. His neighbors looked at him with fear. His family looked at him as a target. He called Saul Berkowitz. "They are destroying my reputation, Saul," Arthur said, his voice hollow. "Everyone thinks I have lost my mind. Gavin has told everyone." "Let them talk," Saul said, his voice booming through the receiver like a lifeline. "This is part of the playbook, Arthur. They want you to feel small. They want you to feel alone so that you will cave and sign the settlement just to make it stop. It is a siege tactic." "I cannot go to the club," Arthur whispered. "I cannot even look Mrs. Higgins in the eye." "You do not need Mrs. Higgins," Saul said firmly. "You need a judge. And on Wednesday, when we walk into that courtroom, we are going to burn their narrative to the ground. Do not engage with anyone. Do not try to defend yourself to the neighbors. Save your anger for the stand." Arthur hung up the phone. He walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at himself. He saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the slump in his shoulders. For a second, he wondered if they were right. Maybe he was just an old, sad man fighting a losing battle against the future. Then he looked closer. He saw the eyes that had stared down union bosses and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts. He saw the jaw that had set like granite when his wife died, holding the family together through the grief. He was not crazy. He was not frail. And he was not done. Arthur went to his study and unlocked the safe. He pulled out the file marked Ross Financials that Saul had compiled. He pulled out the medical report from Dr. Evans. He placed them next to the summons on his desk. "Let them tell their stories," Arthur said to the empty room. "I have the truth. And the truth has receipts." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a sterile purgatory where families went to die. Arthur sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly in his lap to hide their trembling. Beside him, Saul Berkowitz arranged his files with the slow, deliberate movements of a predator preparing a trap, but Arthur could not take his eyes off the other side of the aisle. Tiffany sat next to her lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Vance who wore a suit that cost more than Arthur's first car. She was dressed in a modest navy cardigan and had minimal makeup on, looking every inch the concerned, grieving daughter. Gavin sat behind her, his head bowed in a performance of solemn support. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Beverly Thorne swept into the room, her black robes billowing like storm clouds. She was a woman known for her no-nonsense approach to family law, and Arthur prayed that her reputation held true today. Mr. Vance stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we are here today to discuss a tragedy. We are here to talk about Mr. Arthur Pendelton, a man who built a successful career and a loving family, but who is now, sadly, losing his battle with time." Arthur felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. He wanted to stand up and shout that he was fine, that he could recite the structural load of the Golden Gate Bridge from memory, but Saul's hand rested heavily on his forearm, keeping him anchored. "Over the past 6 months," Mr. Vance continued, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "Mr. Pendelton has exhibited rapid cognitive decline. He has become paranoid, accusing his devoted daughter and son-in-law of theft. He has become financially reckless, spending thousands of dollars on erratic travel while refusing to pay for basic family necessities. And most alarmingly, during a recent family trip to Miami, he disappeared for hours, leaving his grandchildren terrified for his safety." It was a lie so bold that Arthur almost admired the audacity of it. Mr. Vance called his first witness. Miss Tiffany Pendelton Ross. Tiffany walked to the stand, clutching a tissue. She took the oath, her voice wavering perfectly on the last words. "Ms. Ross, can you tell the court about the incident in Miami?" Vance asked softly. Tiffany dabbed at her dry eyes. "It was supposed to be a family vacation. Dad has been so distant lately. We thought the warm weather would be good for him. But as soon as we got there, he was confused. He didn't remember where his room was. He kept asking about Mom." Arthur stiffened. He had not mentioned Martha once in Miami. "And then?" Vance prompted. "Then he got aggressive," Tiffany whispered, looking down at her hands. "We were at dinner, trying to have a nice meal, and he started shouting that we were stealing from him. He threw money at the waiter. It was so embarrassing. The restaurant asked us to leave. And then he just vanished. We woke up the next morning and he was gone. We called the police. We called the hospitals. We thought he had wandered into the ocean." She looked up at the judge, a single tear finally escaping. "Your Honor, I love my father. I just want him to be safe. If he is out there controlling his own finances, with his memory like this, he is going to lose everything. Or worse, he is going to hurt himself. We are just asking for the legal authority to take care of him, like he used to take care of us." The courtroom was silent. Even the stenographer looked at Arthur with pity. He was the villain in his own life story, painted by the person he had loved most in the world. Arthur looked at Gavin. The son-in-law met his gaze and winked. It was a small, quick movement, imperceptible to anyone else, but it hit Arthur like a slap. They thought they had won. They thought the story was more powerful than the truth. Mr. Vance sat down, looking satisfied. "Your witness." Saul Berkowitz stood up slowly. He did not pick up a notepad. He did not look at the judge. He walked toward the witness stand, his eyes locked on Tiffany, and for the first time that morning, Arthur saw a flash of fear behind his daughter's carefully constructed mask. The performance was over. The cross-examination was about to begin. Saul Berkowitz did not pace the floor like a television lawyer. He stood rooted to the spot, a heavy, immovable object in a cheap suit, radiating a quiet danger that made the air in the courtroom thin. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Tiffany, who was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue that remained suspiciously pristine. "Ms. Ross," Saul began, his voice low and gravelly. "You testified under oath that your father is suffering from rapid cognitive decline and is unable to manage his own affairs. You stated that he is confused, paranoid, and a danger to himself. Is that a fair summary of your testimony?" "Yes," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling. "It is heartbreaking to watch." Saul nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document, holding it up for the judge to see. "Your Honor, I would like to enter into Evidence Defense Exhibit A. This is a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Richard Evans, the Chief of Neurology at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, dated just 4 days ago." Mr. Vance jumped up. "Objection. We have not had time to review this." "You will have plenty of time," Saul said, cutting him off. Dr. Evans subjected Mr. Pendelton to a 4-hour battery of tests. The results show that Arthur Pendelton possesses the cognitive function of a man 20 years his junior. His memory recall is in the 99th percentile. His reasoning skills are intact. In Dr. Evans' professional opinion, Mr. Pendelton is not only competent, he is exceptionally sharp. Saul turned back to Tiffany, whose face had gone pale. "So, Ms. Ross, we have a medical expert stating your father is perfectly sane. and we have you stating he is confused. Let us explore why there might be a discrepancy. You mentioned that my client was spending recklessly. Can you elaborate? He throws money away, Tiffany stammered. He forgets what he has bought. Saul picked up a thick binder. Defense Exhibit B. These are the bank statements for Arthur Pendelton's accounts for the last 24 months. I have highlighted every transaction over $500. Ms. Ross, would you like to read the recipient of the first transfer on page 1? Tiffany stared at the binder as if it were a bomb. I did not need to read it. Please, I insist, Saul said, his voice hardening. It says Tiffany Ross, she whispered. $15,000. And the memo line. Tuition assistance, she mumbled. Saul flipped the page. And this one? $8,000 to Tiffany Ross for emergency car repair. And this one? $12,000 to Gavin Ross for investment opportunity. In fact, Ms. Ross, looking at this ledger, 90% of Mr. Pendelton's reckless spending ended up in your bank account. Is that correct? We are family. Tiffany cried, her composure cracking. He wanted to help us. Saul slammed the binder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. So when he gives you money, he is a loving father. But when he stops giving you money, he is mentally incompetent. Is that your argument? No. That is not. Let us talk about the trip to Miami, Saul interrupted, stepping closer. You stated you were terrified for his safety. That he was fragile. That he needed constant supervision. Yes. Tiffany said, latching on to the narrative. He was so confused at the airport. Then why, Saul asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room, did you allow this fragile, confused old man to sit alone in seat 34E of the economy cabin, while you and your husband sat in seats 3A and 3B of business class? The silence that followed was absolute. Tiffany's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at Mr. Vance, but the lawyer was staring at his table, refusing to meet her eyes. It was a mistake with the booking. Tiffany stammered. A mistake. Saul pressed. You walked past him to get to the priority lane. You left him behind. If you were so worried he would wander off, why did you not trade seats with him? Why did you not sit next to him to hold his hand? Tiffany looked at Gavin, desperation in her eyes. Gavin, he said it would be fine. Saul said, turning his gaze to the man sitting behind her. So your husband decided that the man paying for the tickets belonged in the back, while you two drank champagne in the front. And you agreed. It wasn't like that. Tiffany shrieked. You are twisting everything. I am untwisting it, Ms. Ross, Saul said coldly. I am revealing the simple truth. You are not a concerned daughter. You are a cut-off beneficiary having a tantrum. Objection. Vance shouted, but it was weak. Withdrawn, Saul said, turning his back on Tiffany. No further questions for this witness. As Tiffany stumbled down from the stand, her face a mask of humiliation, Arthur watched her. He felt a phantom pain in his chest, the final severance of the cord that had bound them. He had won the point, but he had lost his daughter. And as he looked at Saul, he gave a small, barely perceptible nod. It was time to finish this. It was time for Gavin. Mr. Gavin Ross, please take the stand. Saul Berkowitz did not shout the name. He said it with the casual indifference of a sanitation worker pointing out a bag of refuse. Gavin stood up, shooting a quick, reassuring look at Tiffany, who was now weeping silently into her hands. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothed his expensive Italian suit, and walked to the witness box with a swagger that seemed increasingly out of place in the silent courtroom. He swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, though Arthur knew that for a man like Gavin, truth was a fluid concept, shaped by convenience and opportunity. "Mr. Ross," Saul began, leaning against the railing of the jury box. "You work in finance, is that correct?" "Private equity," Gavin corrected him, lifting his chin slightly. "I manage high net worth portfolios." "Impressive," Saul said. "So you are an expert in managing money. You understand assets, liabilities, and risk." "I do," Gavin said, relaxing slightly. "That is why I am so concerned about Arthur. His spending patterns show a complete lack of fiscal discipline. He is burning through capital that should be preserved for his future care." "For his future care," Saul repeated slowly. "Or for your present debts?" Gavin blinked. "Excuse me." Saul walked back to his table and picked up a stack of documents that was thicker than the one he had used for Tiffany. He dropped it onto the witness stand with a heavy thud that made Gavin jump. "Mr. Ross, this is a credit report generated this morning. It shows that you currently have outstanding personal loans totaling $340,000. Is that correct?" Gavin's face turned a pale, sickly gray. That is private information. You have no right. It is public record when you are sued for non-payment, Mr. Ross," Saul said, his voice sharpening. "You have 3 maxed-out credit cards. You have a second mortgage on your home that is currently 60 days delinquent. And you have a personal loan from a Mr. Sal Moretti, a known associate of certain unlicensed lending organizations in Cicero, for $50,000. Is that correct?" Gavin looked at the judge, panic flaring in his eyes. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. My finances are not on trial here." "They are entirely relevant," Judge Thorne said, her voice cutting through his protest like ice. "You are petitioning to take control of another man's estate while your own house is burning down. Answer the question, Mr. Ross." Gavin swallowed hard. We had some bad luck. The market turned." "Bad luck," Saul scoffed. "Or bad bets. But let us get to the heart of the matter. You testified that you filed this petition to protect Arthur's assets. Specifically his home on Lakeshore Drive, which is valued at $2.5 million. "Yes," Gavin said, grasping at the lifeline. "We wanted to make sure the house was safe." "Safe from whom?" Saul asked. "Safe from Arthur living in it. Or safe for you to sell it?" "I never said we would sell it," Gavin shouted. Saul pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket. He unfolded it slowly. "This is an email dated last Tuesday. The same day you filed for emergency guardianship. It is from your email account, sent to a luxury real estate broker named Marcus Webb. Would you like me to read it?" Gavin went silent. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and realized there was no net. "I will read it," Saul said. Subject line, Lakeshore Drive property. Body, Marcus, we are expecting to have power of attorney by Friday. The owner is being moved to a facility. We need a quick cash sale. We are willing to list at 20% below market value for an immediate close. Let us know if you have buyers ready." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Arthur felt a cold numbness spread through his chest. They were not just going to put him in a home. They were going to evict him from the house he had built with Martha, the house where they had raised Tiffany, and sell it for parts to pay off Gavin's gambling debts. You were selling his house before the judge even heard the case, Saul said, his voice low and dangerous. You were not protecting him. You were liquidating him. It was just an inquiry. Gavin stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. We were exploring options. You were robbing him. Saul roared, pointing a finger inches from Gavin's face. You orchestrated a campaign of gaslighting, humiliation, and legal harassment to steal a confused old man's life savings because you are a failed investor who owes money to sharks. You are not a concerned son-in-law, Mr. Ross. You are a predator. Gavin looked at Tiffany, but she was staring at the floor. He looked at his lawyer, but Mr. Vance was busy packing his briefcase, clearly realizing the ship had not only sailed but had already sunk. I. Gavin stuttered. No further questions, Saul said, turning his back on him. Arthur looked at Gavin, who was slumped in the witness chair, a broken, exposed man. The courtroom felt different now. The tension was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating disgust. The mask had been ripped off, and underneath the concern and the suits, there was nothing but greed. Pure, ugly greed. And for the first time, Arthur felt a strange sense of peace. He had not lost his mind. He had just seen the truth. Judge Thorne did not retreat to her chambers to deliberate. She did not need to. She sat in silence for a long moment, removing her reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose, as if the sheer weight of the greed she had just witnessed was physically exhausting. When she finally looked up, her gaze was not directed at the lawyers, but straight at Tiffany and Gavin. Stand up, she commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. Tiffany and Gavin scrambled to their feet. Gavin looked like a man facing a firing squad, while Tiffany stared at the polished wood of the defense table, refusing to lift her head. In my 20 years on the bench, Judge Thorne began, her tone icy and precise, I have seen families torn apart by addiction, by infidelity, and by tragedy. But I have rarely seen a case of elder financial exploitation as calculated and as repugnant as this one. She picked up the petition they had filed. You came into my courtroom claiming to be concerned for a vulnerable father. You painted a picture of a man losing his mind to justify stripping him of his dignity and his autonomy. But the only thing Mr. Pendelton is guilty of is generosity. And the only thing you are guilty of is avarice. Judge Thorne ripped the petition in half. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet room. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice. Mr. Arthur Pendelton is clearly of sound mind and capable of managing his own affairs. Furthermore, I am forwarding the transcripts of these proceedings, along with the financial records submitted by Mr. Berkowitz, to the district attorney's office. There is ample evidence here to support an investigation into attempted fraud and elder abuse. Tiffany gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. Gavin swayed on his feet, gripping the edge of the table as if the floor were tilting beneath him. But before you go, the judge continued, her eyes locking onto Tiffany, I want you to look at your father. Look at him. Tiffany slowly turned her head. Arthur sat tall at the defense table. He did not look angry. He did not look triumphant. He looked at her with a profound, quiet sadness. It was the look of a man who was watching a ship sail away, knowing he would never see it again. You had a father who loved you enough to fly economy so you could sit in comfort, Judge Thorne said softly. You had a father who built a safety net for you. And instead of saying thank you, you tried to push him off it. I hope the money was worth it, Mrs. Ross. Because you have just bankrupted your soul. Arthur stood up. He buttoned his jacket with steady hands. He looked at Tiffany one last time. In her eyes, he saw the ghost of the little girl he used to carry on his shoulders, the one who used to run to the door when he came home from work. But she was gone, buried under layers of entitlement and cruelty that he could no longer penetrate. He realized then that he was not losing a daughter today. He had lost her years ago, somewhere between the private schools and the country clubs. Today was just the funeral. "Goodbye, Tiffany," Arthur whispered. He turned his back on them. He did not wait for the bailiff to dismiss them. He walked out of the courtroom, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving the wreckage of his family behind him. He pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the hallway, where the air felt lighter, cleaner. The shackles were gone. He was free. The fall of the House of Ross was swift and brutal, a collapse that echoed through the social circles of Chicago like a thunderclap. Within 48 hours of Judge Thorne's ruling, the story of the attempted guardianship had leaked to a local business blog. In the high-stakes world of private equity, reputation was the only currency that mattered, and Gavin Ross was suddenly destitute. On a rainy Tuesday morning, security guards escorted him out of his firm, watching him passively as he loaded a cardboard box into a taxi, stripped of his title, his salary, and his dignity. The financial ruin followed with terrifying speed. The foreclosure notice on their sprawling colonial mansion was taped to the front door less than a week later. The banks, sensing blood in the water, called in the loans. The black Escalade, the symbol of Gavin's fragile ego, was repossessed from the driveway in broad daylight while the neighbors watched from behind twitching curtains. Tiffany fared no better. The country club revoked their membership. Her circle of friends, women who had happily drunk her champagne and eaten her canapés, evaporated the moment the scandal broke. Faced with mounting debts and no skills, the woman who had once mocked her father's clothing was forced to take a job as a checkout clerk at a high-end grocery store, scanning the luxury items she could no longer afford for the people she used to call peers. Arthur watched the disintegration of their lives from a distance, receiving updates from Saul Berkowitz in the quiet sanctuary of his study. "They have moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Cicero," Saul said, sliding a manila folder across the mahogany desk. "It is a rough neighborhood, Arthur. Gavin is driving for a rideshare app. Tiffany is picking up extra shifts. They are barely making rent." Arthur looked at the grainy photograph of his daughter carrying plastic bags into a building with peeling paint. A sharp pang of guilt struck him, the instinctive, biological urge of a parent to rush in and fix the mistake, to write the check that would make the pain go away. He remembered holding her when she scraped her knee, promising to make it better. But then he looked at the next photo. It showed Gavin standing outside a bar, his face twisted in a snarl as he argued with a stranger. The entitlement was still there, simmering under the surface of their failure. If Arthur saved them now, he would not be rescuing them, he would be enabling the very poison that had destroyed them. He would be teaching them that consequences were for other people. "What about the children?" Arthur asked, his voice low. "Leo and Sophie have been withdrawn from private school," Saul replied gently. "They are enrolled in the local public district." Arthur stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray, churning waters of Lake Michigan. The children were the collateral damage. They were innocent passengers in a car driven by reckless narcissists. He could not save his daughter, but he refused to let his grandchildren drown in her wake. "Execute the trust, Saul," Arthur said, his back to the lawyer. Saul opened the leather binder. "The Pendelton Educational Trust. fully funded for 4 years of university tuition, room, and board for both Leo and Sophie. But the conditions must be ironclad, Arthur said, turning around. Direct payments to the institutions only. Not a single penny passes through Tiffany or Gavin's hands. If they attempt to access the principal, if they try to borrow against it, if they even petition for control, the entire fund dissolves and goes to the engineering scholarship at Purdue. It is airtight, Saul assured him. They will not know the money exists until the children receive their acceptance letters. It is a ghost trust. Arthur nodded, picking up his pen. He signed the documents with a steady hand. It was a strange feeling, providing for a future he might not be invited to witness. He was giving his grandchildren a ladder to climb out of the hole their parents had dug, but they would have to do the climbing themselves. He handed the binder back to Saul. "Is there anything else, Arthur?" "Yes," Arthur said. "I want you to put the Lakeshore Drive house on the market." Saul looked up, surprised. "You are selling? This house has been in your family for 30 years. Arthur looked around the room. It was filled with memories of Martha, yes, but lately, the air had become stale with the echoes of arguments and betrayal. It was a museum of a life that no longer existed. "It is too big for one man," Arthur said. "And I think I am done with Chicago winters." He walked over to the globe in the corner of the room and gave it a spin. "I am done being the bank, Saul. I am done being the victim. I think it is time I tried being Arthur again." 6 months had passed since the gavel fell in Judge Thorne's courtroom, and the winter gray of Chicago was finally giving way to the tentative green of spring. Arthur Pendelton stood once again in the bustling terminal of O'Hare International Airport. The noise was the same, the smell of jet fuel and coffee was the same, and the chaotic rush of travelers was the same. But the man standing in the center of it all was entirely different. He was not clutching a battered Samsonite suitcase while waiting for permission to move. He was not checking his watch, anxious about delaying a daughter who was ashamed of him. He was wearing a tailored Italian suit that fit his shoulders perfectly, and he was standing at the counter marked First Class International. "Good morning, Mr. Pendelton," the agent said, smiling warmly as she took his passport. "We have you confirmed in seat 1A for the direct flight to Rome. The lounge is open for you whenever you are ready." "Thank you," Arthur said, his voice steady and clear. He walked through security with his head held high. He was not running away. He was moving forward. Over the past few months, he had sold the house on Lakeshore Drive, donating a significant portion of the proceeds to the Purdue School of Engineering Scholarship Fund he had established. He had kept enough to live comfortably, but the burden of his accumulated wealth, the very thing that had poisoned his family, was gone. He boarded the plane not as a piece of cargo to be hidden in the back, but as a man who had earned his comfort. As he settled into the wide leather seat, he thought of Tiffany and Gavin. He had heard through Saul that they were still in the small apartment in Cicero, slowly clawing their way back to solvency. Gavin was working long hours driving for a rideshare service, and Tiffany had been promoted to shift supervisor at the grocery store. It was a hard life, a life stripped of pretense, but for the first time, it was an honest one. And the trust fund for Leo and Sophie sat waiting, a silent promise that their future would not be mortgaged to pay for their parents' mistakes. Arthur ordered a glass of champagne. As the plane taxied down the runway, gaining speed, he looked out the window. He was meeting a group of retired engineers in Tuscany who worked on restoring ancient aqueducts. It was volunteer work, hard and dirty, but it was work that mattered. He would be building again. He would be useful again. The plane lifted off, the engines roaring with power. Chicago fell away beneath him, becoming a grid of lights and memories. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a faint scar on his heart, but it no longer defined him. He was 69 years old, and he was flying toward a horizon that belonged only to him. Arthur raised his glass to the clouds. To Arthur, he whispered. He took a sip, and the bubbles tasted like freedom. This story of Arthur Pendelton is a powerful reminder that love does not mean allowing yourself to be used. We often think that saying yes to our family is the ultimate act of kindness, but sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is say no. Arthur taught us that dignity has no price tag and that respect must be mutual, regardless of bloodlines. He showed us that enabling bad behavior only cripples the people we love, and that true strength lies in the courage to set boundaries, even when it breaks your heart. It is never too late to rewrite your story. No matter your age or your circumstances, you have the power to reclaim your life, to demand respect, and to find your own path to happiness. If Arthur's journey resonated with you, or if you have ever felt taken for granted by the people closest to you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. Your support helps us continue to bring you these emotional and impactful stories every single day. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to protect your own peace? Do you think Arthur did the right thing, or was he too harsh on his daughter? Please share your experiences and feelings with us. We read every comment and cherish the connection we have with you. We wish you all immense health, joy, and peace in your daily lives. May you always find the strength to stand up for your worth. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.